Hi there, my name is Individual Hall, and I'm going to be discussing Chapter 1 of Citizens, Cops, and Power by Steve Herbert. What is a community? That's a question that can have a very broad answer. Many of us hold our own views of what we believe a community is. According to Chapter 1, the terrain of community, there is a significant issue that we see nowadays involving the concept of it. I want you to think about how you perceive a community to be nowadays for you. Many of us, mostly the older generation, may want to say that there's no form of it nowadays, and that there's a lack of community. This can be due to the way society is structured. Take Vancouver, for example. It is a busy city filled with people going on with their daily lives. There may be some interactions here and there, but it all comes down to the feeling of one word: disconnect. There is a desire amongst everybody that we be connected with one another. A significant way of creating a community that focuses on connection can involve many aspects. The overall consensus, however, lies in the fact that community is there to make life more interesting. It can allow for healthy discussions to take place, and it can allow people to rely on each other for help. Bringing politics into this can play a huge role on how we function together. Policing the community, or at least having the community be integrated and recognized as a tool for policing, allows that communal feeling to emerge. It creates a sense of purpose, but also a sense of security that we all feel like we deserve. Human nature at its core thrives off of social interaction, and we want to be able to protect what we love. Now, I'll be going over what exactly community policing entails, and what in this context means. Further on, there are 3 distinct types of communities to discuss as well: thick recovered communities, thick discovered communities, and thin communities. Lastly, there will be 3 factors that I'll be discussing that encourage people to build a strong community. You can think of this as key ingredients for a recipe. Community as a political entity. When you look at it in a social and political perspective, a community is needed to bring discussions forward. Every day problems occur in the world, and there is a method to solve some problems. This would be one solution. People can share similar values and beliefs, or it could be the opposite. But either way, it allows common concerns to be addressed. Take Surrey, BC, for example. Many neighborhoods and people feel that there is a major crime issue in the city. The best way to voice these opinions is to share them with one another, communicating with each other to figure out solutions, and at the same time, develop a relationship. At some point, the crime issue in Surrey won't just be a problem relating to a location, but a problem involving a community, which then will lead to that very community wanting to protect itself. That voice can only be heard, however, if it is acknowledged by the government itself. On a political standpoint, the community would need to be acknowledged as a way of displaying that protection is a priority. If a goal of a community is to feel safe and secure, the best way to approach that could be to have some sort of assistance from the police. Community policing can be done through various forms. Having that trust through police-community relations, however, is vital. As discussed in the text, people in the community were merely tools to be used by the police to help out here and there. But it's pretty safe to assume that having the community help out through methods like a neighborhood watch will make things much easier for both sides. The more people desire having a safe community, the higher the chances are for the police to be inclined to help. If a community is built out of distrust with the local police, it's a cause of concern. Issues that need to be addressed in a timely fashion can end up being overdue and lead to even bigger, severe problems down the line. It's a two-way street at the end of the day, and the police can assist in making the daily lives of the public safer, while the community provides the police with more knowledge and awareness to areas that need focus. It's a transaction of information that helps everybody out. Overall, crime reduction can occur in a much more efficient manner if there is support from both sides. Now, the first version of a community I want to talk about is a thick recovered community. For many, it's much easier to get along with someone that you already share similar values with. Thick recovered communities look into maintaining that ease. You can look at it as a set narrative for each individual to follow. There's already rules and regulations set that each person follows, and it's almost as if there's a syllabus for the community to follow. It's like having a guideline that you receive in class to help you find your way. Each person usually would share a fixed set of beliefs, and the entire community would then be focusing on making sure that it remains that way. There's a strong reinforcement aspect on the existing way of life rather than having a change in it. I see a huge problem in this type of community, but I can also see the positives. The positives that come with this are the fact that everybody is already at a reasonable level of connection with each other. The difficult task of being acquainted with each other would be much easier. If you were to connect this back to having a community as a political entity, there would already be a strong group of individuals that agree with each other with what they want to do. The problem with this type, however, is the fact that it basically has an exclusivity factor in it. If a group of people share similar values, then anybody that does not fit is essentially not welcome. Now, that may not be directed at the person, but anybody would feel like they're being left out if they're extremely different from others. Think back to how we discussed gated communities in class. There is a similar problem that arises from here just as it did in that discussion. It creates an outsider versus insider situation and can potentially lead to a power imbalance among the community. It can be perceived to be a much more close-minded community. Now, this is where a discovered community comes into play. In this case, the community is much more open-minded. Here, there is still a structure, but it's not the same as a recovered one. There is still a sense of containment, or rather a community being created around one goal, but now that goal is much more free-form than a set goal. As stated in the text, community is thus a process, not a thing, unlike what a recovered one may be. In the previous type, you can think of it as an immovable rock, and for this type, a pile of Play-Doh. Just like Play-Doh can morph around into wherever you like, there is more of a discussion that is open to other beliefs and values in a discovered community. And just as the name implies, there is room for discovery and exploration amongst other perspectives that people may share. The effect that this type of community may have on the overall happiness of the community may also be greater than a recovered one. But that's something that doesn't have a right or wrong answer. It's up to the community at the end of the day to decide how to function collectively and what they believe is best for them. Sadly, because of the nature of how both of these thick communities work, it's difficult to connect it back to the modern world. We're fairly distant with each other, and not just physically because of the urban environment, but also with our opinions socially. The last type of community, a thin community, takes both the rock that is a recovered one and the Play-Doh that is discovered and places the individual into the equation. The perspective of a thin type takes the notion of being connected as a community as something that you can choose to do whenever you would like to. There's no need for a constant attachment. Both thick communities are still in the form of containment, where you're still a part of a group, but in terms of a thin type, you can come and go as you please. There's no one specific set you need to align yourself to, and you also aren't locked into having to share similar values. It seems pretty similar to a discovered type, due to its also having a sense of freedom attached to it, but it differs in the sense that you are truly solo, that you can choose to separate yourself from the group entirely. I personally see it as a type of community that respects the fact that some people need space, and that very space is still a form of connection. Taking all of this in, there's one thing that all communities tend to strive for, and that's a sense of security. For example, the most recent form that we have felt as individuals this past year has been from wearing masks to protect ourselves. Similar things can occur within a community. We all want to feel safe and secure, as well as rely on each other when the time comes. Here's an example from my dad. He says that whenever we leave the house, meaning that nobody is home, he's not too worried about the house being robbed or even leaving a door open. Why that's the case? Well, because he relies on our neighbors and trusts them to keep an eye on things. There was once a time where one of our neighbors called us and let us know that somebody had attempted to break into my car. It's the same sense of security that can be formed from three distinct factors. Property ownership is the first one. I see this factor as a psychological one or even socially distinct because it relies on the fact that we as individuals see anybody owning property as a committed individual. Seeing others own a home, take care of their home, all lead to a visual representation of comfort. Taking in that visual as a neighbor encourages others to do the same and want to build some form of system of security. On the outside, it looks like this is a materialistic protection, but it's actually a social protection. The next factor is when those same neighbors have children running about. Children are then what connect the neighbors with each other. As they are running about outside, playing with each other, it creates an opportunity to connect with one another. Just as kids bring us outside, being outside doing various activities is also a prime factor in developing a sense of security. Here's another example. Perhaps everybody in the neighborhood enjoys gardening. Now, that's an excellent excuse to go over next door and ask for some gardening tips, but also at the same time form a connection. There can be other activities that people do. It can be walking their dog. It could be, fixing a bike. But anything you do, as long as you're outside and there are people around you to share a conversation with, that's what helps build a sense of security. It's that relationship that you form with each other where then you can then in the future rely on each other. At the beginning, I briefly touched upon how we seem to have a disconnect in our communities nowadays. This last factor is a great example of how we can change that. We all live busy lives in busy cities, but when we are free, we choose to spend our time indoors on our phones or other tech. When it comes to these three types of communities, the role of having positive police-community relationships, or the factors that allow community to feel safe and secure, it all comes down to what we as individuals have the capacity to do. A community can be created in many ways and defined in many ways, but ultimately it is a hard concept to perfect. Thank you for listening.